That guy over there is Doug Kaplan, producer extraordinaire. This guy right here, I'm Doc Reno from multiple iHeartRadio stations, rock stations, and classic rock stations all across the country. And this is the Ultimate Rock Podcast. Let me tell you what you can expect and why this podcast is different from all the others. I've been in radio most of my life. I'm a big fan of rock and roll. I do rock radio. And each episode, I'll be here with my co-host, author, historian, involved in music, radio, television, you name it. A podcast doesn't do this guy justice. Look him up on Google. I'll just tell you that. My co-host and my close friend, Denny Somach, who has been hosting and producing rock radio shows for most of his career. And between the two of us, we've had the opportunity to meet, interview, and enjoy performances by the greatest artists of all time. And unlike other programs, we're going to present the stories, and you will have a chance to hear from the artist themselves. That's what's so cool about the Ultimate Rock Podcast. And we're going to bring you the stories. You'll hear it from the people we talk about. And I think the best way for us to get this thing going here is to jump right into today's episode. And Denny, we're going to kick things off with...
Okay. Hey, Doc. Well, I thought for this show, I realized, wait a minute, there's an anniversary that we want to mention. It was 40 years ago, September 25th, 1980 to be exact, that John Bonham of Led Zeppelin passed away. Now, the band was about to embark on a North American tour in 1980. Doc, did you have tickets?
I did have tickets, and I didn't know what was going to happen like everybody else. You know, they were even on the radio speculating like, okay, does this mean the breakup of the band? Are they going to find another drummer to go on tour? So I was really bummed out because I've never seen Led Zeppelin in concert. And they were coming to Cleveland, my hometown, and I think within months. And I was so excited to go. It's my all-time favorite band, as you know. So, yeah, I did have tickets.
Yeah, and you heard about it, Bonham's death, on the radio.
Yes. The great thing about Cleveland, it's a great rock town. The Rock Hall's there for a reason. And multiple rock stations to listen to. And at the time, I was listening to Kid Leo on MMS in Cleveland. And we do have the report,
Is this what you heard? Tell me, because I dug this out. Doug, go ahead.
The drummer was found dead in bed yesterday after a night of heavy drinking and hard rehearsal. An autopsy is set for today, but police feel that John Bonham may have died by choking to death after vomiting in his sleep. The first major Led Zeppelin tour in 3 years had been set to begin in just a couple of weeks, but it appears to have been canceled now. And there is a question as to what Bonham's death will mean to the group. British DJ Nicky Horn.
So many tragedies have befallen this band that I really think that this is the final, it must be the end.
But the record company will not speculate on the fate of the group.
You know, Denny, you sent me that clip like 4 or 5 days ago, and I told you before we started the podcast today that it gave me chills. I'm not trying to be corny, but hearing that again is just like, I feel like I'm a flashback 40 years ago. I was a teenager.
Gave me chills to find it, to say, I got to play this for Doc. He's not going to believe it.
Oh, my gosh, yeah. And even the Kid Leo stuff you sent me from MMS. But
I hate to, give ourselves a pat, but this is the kind of stuff we're going to be playing on this show.
Absolutely. That's why this podcast is going to be different, the Ultimate Rock Podcast. So,
the
Led Zeppelin stories.
Yeah, this is the actual podcast. He's regarded as one of the greatest drummers, as you know, and I know a lot of drummers who revere him. So
he's the drummer's drummer.
Yeah.
You know, when you and I can pipe in and talk about who we think should be, in the top 3 of drummers of all time, but when you have guys like, like an Alex Van Halen,
right,
naming his top drummers, a Dave Grohl, Bonham's always in the conversation.
So, as you know, I collect Led Zeppelin stories,
right?
And I thought I'd go to my John Bonham folder. I actually have a John Bonham folder. Pull out a few of the stories that I found. So the first is from Alex and Eddie Van Halen, who recall the first time they met John Bonham at an early point in their career. It was at the famous Rainbow Bar and Grill. For those of you not familiar with the Rainbow, it's a bar and restaurant on the Sunset Strip in West Hollywood, California. The Rainbow.
Legendary place.
Legendary. Founded in 1972, opened actually on April 16th with a party for Elton John. Quickly became known as a hangout for rock stars and celebrities. It's legendary, filled with stories. We could probably do a whole episode on it. We might just do that. So anyway, when Van Halen was starting out, Eddie and Alex were in L.A., and like just about everybody else, they went to the Rainbow to go look for stars. And that's where they ran into John Bonham. And this is, well, Eddie and Alex will tell you the story directly.
Yeah, we were playing at Gazzari's, where it was one of the first places in Hollywood that we played. And on one of the breaks, I went over to the Rainbow, which is kind of a hangout for musicians and
when they're in town.
Like a lot of IMAs, you know, like I want to be, or I'm a model. I'm a dancer. So I seen this guy. He's pretty big, you know. Actually, for his whatever, he doesn't look that big on film or on. Anyway, to make a long story short, I wanted to walk up to him and I said, "Hey, John, how you doing? Good to meet you." And the guy had a cast on his arm to here, and I went like this to shake his hand, and the guy took a poke at me. Well, you know, I'm not quite as big. I'm just a little quicker than him. So he missed, and I said, Then he had a bodyguard who was about...
Came up to his waist.
Yeah.
I swear to God. Was he
So anyway, that was my experience with Bonham, and it was a pleasure meeting him.
Wow, that's mostly Alex Van Halen talking there. The Van Halen brothers talking about meeting John Bonham for the first time in Los Angeles. Doc Reno, it's the Ultimate Rock Podcast with Denny Somach, our producer today. And always, Mr. Doug Kaplan over there taking care of business for us. And this episode is all about John Bonham and the 40th anniversary of his passing. Yes, even phone ringing you're going to get on this podcast here. We are recording this right now in September of 2020, and this is the anniversary month. John Bonham passed away on September 25th, 1980.
So I tried to find some good recollections, which wasn't hard to do, since most people I spoke to are fans like you and I.
Right.
And here's the best example, because he is one of the greatest guys, and I'm sure you've seen him over the years. This is a great tale from Alice Cooper, who first met John Bonham and Led Zeppelin on the first tour, 1969, when they shared the bill with Zeppelin at once again, the Whiskey A Go-Go. Here's Alice.
I know I have a slide that somebody took that said Alice Cooper and Led Zeppelin this weekend only. And at the time, you know, we were just local bands as far as we were concerned. We didn't even know Led Zeppelin was, you know, who they were. It just was another band. We figured they were from the Valley or something, you know, until we got there. And of course, we saw Jimmy Page, and us being Yardbirds fans, realized that you know, he was in the Yardbirds, and that was a big deal to us. So we were immediately humbled by that, because of the fact that here was a Yardbird, you know. Before that, you know, nobody had really heard of Jimmy Page. He might have played some lead with the Kinks and things like that, or on sessions, but honestly, nobody had ever heard of him. So we got there, and they had British accents, which was kind of like a surprise to us. And they were, you know, we just sort of like said, well, who goes on first? Doesn't matter to us. You know, we flipped a coin. I think we went on first the first night. They went on first the second night. But we really, you know, really got along. They were just a great band. I mean, as far as we were concerned, they were far, you know, a cut above a local band, that's for sure.
Yeah, Led Zeppelin's definitely not from the Valley. And the interesting thing about that clip right there is that's Alice Cooper talking about him and the band back in '69. So School's Out hadn't even come out
Only
yet.
the first album,
Yeah.
I think. Pretty's For You, I think.
Yeah, so we're only talking one album, Alice Cooper there. Now, Alice also had some thoughts, great story in my opinion. Thanks for grabbing this clip too, Denny, on his take on Keith Moon and John Bonham, you know, the comparisons between the two. Let's listen to that, Doug.
Bonham hit the drums hard. I don't think that Bonham hit the drums harder, though, than Buddy Miles or another drummer named Frosty. from Lee Michaels. There was a couple of drummers that were just annihilated their drums. John was one of them, and he was a really good drummer. There's always going to be the controversy who was better, Bonham or Keith Moon. That's would depend on whose corner you're in. I always thought Keith Moon was a more versatile drummer than John Bonham, but Bonham really hit the drums hard.
And as we talked about earlier, Denny, you and I both are great, but we both feel the same, that John Bonham and Keith Moon are totally different styles of drumming.
Absolutely.
They're just not the same drummer.
Yeah.
So anyway, speaking of drummers, Simon Kirke.
Yeah. Let's continue. This is the Ultimate Rock Podcast, so we're going to tell you the ultimate stories. Now, Simon Kirke, you know him from the band Free all right now, but of course you know him from Bad Company. He's still out there touring all the time.
Yes, absolutely.
But he has a very unique perspective to bring us, because Bad Company was managed by Zeppelin manager Peter Grant. And they were huge when they came out, with that first album. And Peter Grant was the first band signed to their Swan Song record label by Peter Grant. Anyway, Simon recalls the first time he met John Bonham. It wasn't there. It was when he was in the band Free. They just came over to New York. They just had a big hit called All Right Now, and they were coming over to tour for the first time. And, Simon, tell the story.
My very, very first memory of Bonzo was when Free came to New York, opening for Blind Faith. With four little kids, we were sat in this Irish bar on 8th and 48th. We just arrived. We were terrified because we'd been turned over by the customs in JFK, and we turned inside out because of our hair. So we're sitting there nursing our little Budweiser or whatever, and the barman comes over and he's got 4 pints of Guinness, and he puts them down on the table between us. He said, "That's from that guy over there." And it's Bonzo. And he goes, welcome to America, guys.
Wow.
Great.
What a great story.
Great way to be welcomed.
Yeah, I was going to say, personally, though, I'd rather have the Budweiser than the Guinness, but that's a story for a whole nother day. Now, we have another story from, another funny story, actually, from Simon Kirke and Bonzo, Denny.
Yeah, I know Simon pretty well over the years, and I've seen him. And by the way, I don't know if you know, his daughter is a really well-known actress. She's on that show Girls, Jenna Simon. That's
I did
his
not
daughter.
know that. I'll have
That's
to,
his daughter.
when we're done here, I'll Google her,
Anyway, I didn't want to get too far off the track. But Simon was actually the last person to play live with Bonham. And it would turn out to be their final Led Zeppelin tour, which was the tour over Europe, 1980.
Okay.
The one that was about to come to America, obviously. Now, that tour ran from June 17th to July 7th, 1980. 10 of the tour's shows were performed in cities throughout West Germany, as well as one show each in Brussels, Rotterdam, Vienna, Zurich, and West Berlin. I want to tell you that after Simon told me the story that you're about to hear, I had to stop the interview. He had to compose himself. He actually started to tear up.
Really?
So,
Wow.
Yeah, listen to this.
I was at a loose end, and Bad Company were kind of gone on hiatus. So Peter called me up and said, "Listen, we're in Germany. Why don't you come and hang out with us for a few days? Come over from England." Oh, yeah, it's not long. It's like an hour flight. So I went over to Frankfurt. They were playing there. And after the show, Bonzo came up to me out of the blue and said, "Hey, Kirke, would you like to play drums on Whole Lot of Love?" I said, "I'd love to." Because no one had ever played with them on stage other than
Ronnie Wood.
Ronnie, okay. And it was an honor. And I thought, oh, God. I said, "John, I'd love to. Yes. Where did we rehearse?" He says, "In my bedroom in a hotel." What? I thought we'd have 2 drum kits or something in a studio. So I went up to his room, and he's got like 2 twin beds. And he sat on one bed, I'm sat on the other. We're facing each other, And with our hands on our knees and thighs, he ran me through all the different time changes. He says, "I start off, da-da-da-da." I said, "I know the beginning, John. I have heard it a few times." He said, "No, listen, pay attention." He was like a college professor. "Pay attention, because after 3 minutes. I stop. Jimmy goes. Anyway, we ran through all this, and the next night they announced me, and I went on, and they put another kit next to John's, and I'm getting quite emotional thinking about it, because really that was their last gig, and it was the last I ever saw John, because he died, a couple of months later.
Okay, well,
okay, there you go. Yeah, that was a great story. Wow, Simon Kirk there. Talking about, being not only on stage, he had to be out of his mind.
Yeah.
You're on stage with Led Zeppelin. You're playing next to John Bonham. You better bring your A game. And then, and for Bonham to pass away just a few days later, that's an incredible story. Just for the record here, we're going to be setting up for the Ultimate Rock podcast. We're going to be setting up Facebook pages, Instagram, and on my iHeart radio stations throughout the country, the rock and classic rock stations that I'm on, Doc Reno. I will keep everybody informed. Also on my social media on when we get these pages going.
Yeah. Well, this is the Ultimate Rock Podcast with Doc Reno and me, Denny Somach. For this episode, we're bringing you John Bonham stories as we mark the 40 years since the passing of John in 1980. And we're trying to show you this is the kind of stuff you're going to get on this show. You're not going to hear it anywhere else, because these interviews are ours.
Well,
and
one of the greatest things about you, Denny, I mean, we're close friends, but I'm gonna say it because I know you won't. This man has John Bonham on audio, and John Bonham didn't do a lot of interviews. So when you can play on a podcast audio of the late great John Bonham speaking, as you know, he didn't do a lot of interviews. So this is big time. And Bonham gave an interview back in 1970 when the prestigious British music publication Melody Maker, if you're a true fan of rock and roll, you know that magazine, named Led Zeppelin the top rock group after 8 years straight of the Beatles winning that title. So John was asked to compare Zeppelin to the Beatles, which I don't think is a fair comparison. Two totally different types of rock bands, in my opinion. But go ahead, Doug, and play that John Bonham clip there.
Good evening. Tonight, a musical surprise as the Beatles topple.
It's cool, it's groovy, it's number one, the Led Zeppelin.
What?
The Led Zeppelin, but I'm afraid that you and other dads like you may never have heard of them. But this British group has made musical history today. Readers of the Melody Maker have voted them the top world group. The significance is that the Beatles have held this title for 8 years. But now, the Beatles are out. 8 years ago, the Beatles were 4 clean-cut and clean-shaven young men who had a happy knack for songwriting. The tunes they wrote and sang were evergreens, as hummable and as immortal as I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas and Autumn Leaves. But a new generation was growing up, a generation to whom Bing Crosby and the Ink Spots meant nothing, a generation that demanded a new kind of music. Music like the music of the Led Zeppelin.
The Beatles ran for 8 years, and when one thinks of a song of theirs, Yesterday, which had all sorts of variations played upon it, do you think as musicians you'll be able to last as long as 8 years? Do you think you'll be inventive enough? The old thing about being able to whistle a tune, being able to hum the tune as you go away, I don't think I could hum any of your stuff.
No, but I think it's changing. That's the main thing, you see. I think that's why the awards have changed, because the kids are changing for a start.
That's true.
And so is the music changing. I think there's already a single out of Whole Lot of Love, an orchestra playing it, which is quite interesting, really. The flute plays what the lead vocal would do.
So you're saying that your fans don't necessarily want to whistle the tunes, to hum the tune. They're much more sophisticated than, my generation.
I think so. Not in that sense. I think these days let's say the public, it's not just say the kids, because we've had sort of all sorts of people at concerts, I think that they're coming to listen to what you're playing and not just to look at you and see what you are. I mean, I remember when I was, let's go back a few years, when I first went to see the Beatles, because we've mentioned them a few times, it was to look at them, It wasn't, you didn't really bother what you were listening to.
Yes.
And today, it's not what you are, it's what you're playing.
So true.
The words of John Bonham himself. And as you mentioned, Doc, there's very few interviews with John Bonham, so I'm glad we were able to throw that in there. So.
Well, there's some clips that you brought today. We're both Yes fans, and you brought some clips of who I feel is the greatest bass player ever lived, Chris Squire.
I'll agree with you there.
And what's the backstory on this?
Okay, well, if you remember when Zeppelin played the benefit concert at the O2 Arena in London, that was 2007. There were a couple other artists who played that show, mostly Atlantic-related to open. Chris Squire being in Yes, which, along with Zeppelin, were the two biggest groups throughout the years. Of course, the Stones were in there, too, for a while. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so Chris, for one, he explains how he got to be the opening act. Can you imagine being the opening act for Zeppelin? Okay, so this is
incredible.
Chris will tell you how it happened. They only did, well, just let Chris tell the story.
I was asked by Phil Carson, who was a long-time employee at Atlantic, and he said that Led Zeppelin were going to reform with Jason Bonham, of course, John's son, playing drums, and they would play the second half. In the first half, there was going to be a variety of Atlantic acts, and he said, would you open the show with Keith Emerson doing, ELP's Fanfare for a Common Man, and with Simon Kirk from Bad Company playing drums, and Alan White was playing timpani parts. Yeah, we had a day's rehearsal, and it was nerve-wracking, but it came off great, and I'm sure at some point there'll be a film of it surfacing, if there probably isn't already.
There is one on YouTube, by the way. I got to tell you a funny story. I went to see Yes, I think it was like in 2008, 2009, and I said, the first time I had seen Chris in about a year, and I said, Chris, what was it like playing that show? And he goes, well, it was amazing, and he starts telling me about the backstage, and I said, well, did you ever see it? He goes, no, I took out my phone. It's on YouTube. I showed it to him. So I'm sitting there watching with Chris Squire.
That's amazing.
Him playing on somebody had filmed it on a YouTube clip. So
gotta love the internet, I'll tell you that much. Chris Squire from Yes talking about the Led Zeppelin Celebration Day concert, and Jason Bonham, of course, filled in for his father and was actually on the bill for the first time. Jason filled in at the Atlantic Records 40th anniversary concert. That was back in 1988.
Yeah, and Chris was there as well, because Yes played the... Jason was 19 at the time. So Chris has an analysis of Jason. You want to play that, Doug?
The last time I'd seen them was at the Atlantic 40th in 1988 at Madison Square Garden, where their performance left a little to be desired. But in all fairness, Jason was 19 years old or something then. It must have been difficult for him to be doing that show in his father's footsteps. But, 20 years later, Jason has become a great drummer. And the whole power of Zeppelin really comes from the drums, actually. And he played magnificently, and the whole band did.
Yeah, some nice words there on Jason.
Yeah, and he's right about Jason too, because that had to be pretty emotional for him to play in his father's place that night. We're going to change gears here. We want to talk about Danny Goldberg. Right,
well, before that, because I found this clip of Jason talking about how he learned to play drums. So I figured this might be
you have it on your computer?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Here.
All right,
Doug, can you throw that in? I don't mean to change, but that's the beauty of this.
That's the beauty
As we go along, we throw in what we want.
Computers, cell phones going off. It's the way it's going to be.
I started to play drums from about the age 4 or 5. I actually don't remember being taught, but it was... I've watched old movie footage of where I'm playing as a child. Mainly I used to play along to jukebox. My dad would program it, and generally I've spoken about before is I'd be woken up in the middle of the night, Dad would come and wake me up and say, oh, come and play drums with my friends. And I'd come downstairs in my pajamas, and he'd put the jukebox on. I'd play All Right Now or something from Bad Company and Free and
nice
Stones. And he was just very proud. So that was kind of my, there's the kind of the parties and musicians didn't really know anything different. So to me, it was just music.
Before we jump into Danny here, just to say something about that, you've seen Jason Bonham's Led Zeppelin Evening.
Yeah.
I love the show. I think it's phenomenal. But my favorite part of the show is the old clips he shows when he was a kid and his dad is having fun with him and he's playing drums and he tells the stories on stage.
Yeah, and by the way, I got plenty of them. So we got some.
Yeah,
some
this
good
is not the
Jason
first time
Bonham.
we're going to be talking about Led Zeppelin on this podcast.
really.
Not with the two of us.
No, we may have to have a segment just dedicated to them. Anyway,
absolutely.
Here's a story I got. This is from Danny Goldberg. Now, your name might not mean anything to you, but Danny actually started. He was a publicist. He was a publicist for Led Zeppelin, actually, and then he ran Swan Song Records in America, and then he became a manager, and he's done just about everything there is in the business. But he actually was the manager of Nirvana. He signed them, got them signed to Geffen Records. But he told me this story one day, and he said, because of my relationship with Zeppelin and John Bonham.
That's how he got the gig.
That's how he got the gig. Dave Grohl was a nut. But Danny tells the story better than I do.
Dave Grohl loves Led Zeppelin, and he loves to hear stories about Led Zeppelin. He just wanted to really hear stories about John Bonham. My relationship with Dave Grohl consisted primarily of trying to think of John Bonham stories to keep him entertained. But, Kurt Cobain was in charge of what Nirvana did. At that time, whenever there were band meetings, Dave Grohl would just say, "Don't ask me, I'm just the drummer." He'd been a newcomer to the band. I must confess, I had no idea how brilliant he was, that he also was a great singer and a songwriter. In the context of Nirvana, he really was the drummer. But he did love to talk about John Bonham and hear stories about Led Zeppelin. I think to this day, if he could go out with Jimmy and Robert and Jonesy, he would do it in a minute.
Yeah. In case you just missed the name, it's Danny Goldberg, Nirvana's manager there. And one of his John Bonham stories, Denny, when you spoke to Danny, Danny, say that fast 5 times. You also asked him if he was surprised that Led Zeppelin didn't continue after John Bonham passed away.
Yeah, and interesting answer. Doug, hit it.
Robert Plant and John Bonham were very old friends. They came from the same town or the same region of England. And Robert had been through a lot. I think one of his sons died in a tragic illness. The death of Bonham, I think, hit Robert particularly hard. And I was not surprised. I think, again, there was, for example, Keith Moon died young in The Who, and they had another drummer, no problem. And I think Keith Moon was a terrific drummer, but he was not an integral part of the sound of The Who, the way John Bonham was an integral part of the sound of.
I disagree with that.
They certainly could have done it and made it work as a business, but knowing them personally and knowing how close Robert was to Bonzo, I'm not surprised that he didn't want to continue, and I have a feeling he was the one that didn't want to continue. I was not working for Zeppelin anymore when Bonham died. He died about a year after I left working for them. So I wasn't part of those conversations, but I was not surprised to hear it, no.
Denny, you would know more than I would. Robert Plant is the reason why Led Zeppelin didn't continue on. He was crushed by John Bonham's death.
That's right. Absolutely. Because who knows? There were, and in future shows, I mean, I even have stories about when they were considering going out without Robert and Steven Tyler.
And Steven Tyler
rehearsals.
auditioned.
I have an eyewitness to those rehearsals. Steven's personal guy. We sat down one day and he told me the stories that I've never heard anybody else tell.
I know this is going to piss people off, but that would have been a horrible choice to replace Robert Plant, in my opinion. Not even close vocally. That would have been a disaster. I think we have one more story, and this is from one of my all-time favorite guitar players, Tony Iommi of Black Sabbath. I always tell people, and I said this before the podcast, in my opinion, Led Zeppelin is the greatest rock and roll band ever. And Black Sabbath is a distant second. So those are my two favorite bands. But this is Tommy, I'm sorry. Tony, I'm sorry. I'm getting confused here. Tony Iommi and John Bonham were very close. People might not know this. I didn't know this until Denny told me this. That Bonham was the best man at Tony's wedding ceremony. I did not know that until Denny Somach told me that. And Sabbath hails from the Midlands in England, the same area that John Bonham called home. And Bonham would go to Sabbath shows and pester drummer Bill Ward, who can easily be pestered, everything I've read about him, to let him play drums with the band. And let's let Tony Iommi here tell the story.
Well, yes. I mean, John used to come to the gigs, usually come with me. And he'd always say to Bill, can I have a go can I have a go? You know, can I have a play? And Bill let him play the one time, and John broke his kit. Broke his snare and broke his fitments.
That's hilarious. Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. I bet Bill Ward was livid.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, look, we're going to wrap up the podcast here. You had a chance to hear from Alex and Eddie Van Halen, Alice Cooper, Chris Squire of Yes, Tony Iommi of Black Sabbath, Simon Kirke of Bad Company, and John Bonham himself. Come on, man. I mean, seriously, the legendary powerhouse drummer of Led Zeppelin. And we're doing this podcast in September of 2020. This month is the 40-year anniversary of the unfortunate passing of John Bonham. Here on today's Ultimate Rock podcast, we wanted to honor John because, you know, I don't care who you are, if you know anything about rock and roll, if he's not in your top 3 drummers, then there's something seriously wrong with you.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Well, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this installment, and I'll be searching the archives. We'll be putting some interesting things together. I don't even know what we're going to do on the next one, but I know as soon as I leave here, I'll start going through my files, and we'll find a bunch of good stuff. If there's anything you want to hear in particular, you have a question you want answered, you want to hear about your favorite artists, although I'm sure we're going to cover a lot of them, events in rock history, whatever it is. If if we have it in the archives, you'll hear it. Just let us know.
Touch base with me, actually. You can Doc Reno, DOCRENO, at iHeartRadio.com. You can email me at iHeart, and, I'll definitely respond if I hear from you. You can also find me on Facebook and Twitter at DOCRENO and Radio Jock Doc Reno on Instagram.
And the UltimateRockPodcast.com, which we're in the process of putting some unbelievable stuff on. But go check it out, and you'll see the progress of it.
And you'll learn real fast that we just kind of wing things. So, I like bloopers and all. So that's what this podcast is going to be all about. It's not going to be shiny, but it's going to be rock and roll. For producer Doug Kaplan, my co-host Denny Somach, I'm Doc Reno. Have a rockin' day. We'll talk to you later.